Welcome everyone. I see a lot of people already joining the meeting. We're here obviously because of the World AMR Awareness Week. Having this live webinar, very happy to have everyone here. My name is Martijn van Gerven, a research program manager at the Access to Medicine Foundation. And today we're here to really discuss how we can better engage pharmaceutical companies in acting on the political declaration on AMR that was approved a few months ago. So I'm very happy to have five exciting speakers with me today. To start off with Bhakti Chavan, representing the WHO task force of AMR survivors, sharing her story on how to deal with a drug-resistant infection. Alexandra Cameron, unit head at the Impact Initiatives and Research Coordination at the World Health Organization. Boumediene Soufi, global head antimicrobial resistance at Sandoz. Daniel Shoukimas, co-founder and chief product officer at mPharma. And last but not least, Maria Larsson Ortino, senior global ESG manager at Legal and General Investment. Thank you all for taking the time to share your expertise. I also want to flag to the audience that if you have a question for the panelists, we will have some time at the end of the meeting to answer any questions you might have. So please feel free to share them over chat or the Q&A button, depending on which one is available to you. And this webinar really builds on the efforts of the Access to Medicine Foundation to drive industry change when it comes to access to medicine in low-middle income countries, but also to curb AMR. And since 2017, the foundation publishes the AMR benchmark, which is really a tool to track and measure progress by companies in curbing AMR, specifically looking at access, at stewardship, antibiotic waste for manufacturing, but also R&D. And this does not only identify best practices and actions that companies can take, but it also incentivizes and informs governments, policymakers, and investors on what to include in AMR policies, for example, to hold companies accountable. And I'm also very happy to announce that at the foundation, we are currently working on a new iteration of the AMR benchmark. And with the number of deaths due to AMR expected to rise significantly in the upcoming decades, I think the urgent need for action hasn't been more critical than now. And this was recognized, obviously, by member states of the United Nations. Like I said, not even 2 months ago, they approved a groundbreaking political declaration on AMR, setting targets, setting commitments, including reducing the global burden of AMR with 10% by 2030. So I think this is a very ambitious goal, and there's a lot of stakeholders, obviously, that can play a part. And while this political declaration focuses a lot on the role of governments to achieve this, I really think there's still a big piece of the puzzle missing, which we'll be talking about today. And I think this involves the critical role of pharmaceutical companies in basically changing the lives of billions of people around the world, because I don't think there can be a sustainable solution without the active involvement of these pharmaceutical companies. They have the means to do R&D. They're very uniquely placed to provide access to countries who need access the most. Because without antibiotics, antifungals, and also vaccines reaching the ones who need them the most, I think these life-saving products basically become useless for public health. And that's quite a statement, but I do think that's something to realize, and it's very good that we can discuss this topic today. And when it comes to access, when it comes to AMR, I don't think there's anything that speaks louder than the voices of patients themselves. So I would like to give the floor to Bhakti Chavan, who will share her experience of dealing with multi-drug resistant tuberculosis. And feel free to share your presentation as well, I think on the top right, you can see a share button. So Bhakti, handing over to you. Can you hear me, Bhakti?
Yes, I can hear you. Is my screen is visible? Hello?
We cannot hear you.
Visible?
There seems to be an issue. So I think we can maybe continue to the panel and let's see if we can come back to Bhakti at a later,
hello,
later point. Maybe Bhakti, you can see if you can join the meeting again, because at the moment we cannot see or hear you. Oh, other people can hear Bhakti.
I can hear.
Is it just me?
Hello?
Okay, I'll stop talking.
I can hear.
But let me know when I can pick it up again, because I cannot hear Bhakti. So that's on me. All yours, sorry.
Is my presentation is visible? Not yet.
Oh, we can't see anything that you're presenting, no.
No.
It's visible now?
Not yet, no.
No. No.
Now? I'm
No.
sharing my...
Maybe Bhakti, do you think you could start the presentation? And then if, or is it essential to have the slides as well?
Yeah, so I just tell my story if the presentation is not visible. I'll just, yeah. Is that fine? It's, I just tell my story.
I think that would be a good idea.
Okay, because I think there is some technical glitch, so I could not share my presentation. So yes, my name is Bhakti Chavan. I am from India. I stay in Mumbai. So from ambitious college-going girl to XDR tuberculosis survivor, here I want to share my story. So in 2017, when I was completing my master degree, and just after completing my post-graduation, I was looking for a job. When I started observing a swelling on the right side of my neck. Along with that, there was other symptoms like weakness, fever. So I visited a family physician who prescribed me with the 7 days medications. Despite of which my swelling was not reducing. So I went to the another expert doctor, ENT specialist, who asked me to undergo some basic, investigational tests. The report says that I'm suffering with the tuberculosis, but those tests was very basic. Those was a microscopic examination, and he immediately put me on the first line TB medication because I was not having any previous history of surviving TB. So then I thought of taking another opinion from the expert doctor. So I went to the pulmonologist who asked me to, undergo a surgery, a biopsy test, and he asked me to send the samples for further advanced testing like gene expert and drug sensitivity test. So I undergone the surgery, and immediately after the surgery day, my stitches got open because my TB infection was active. And the gene expert report came within 2 days, which says I'm suffering with the drug-resistant tuberculosis. And then after 15 to 20 days, my culture test also came, and I was resistant to most of the powerful TB medications, first line as well as few of the second line medication as well. So my diagnosis was I'm suffering with the XDR tuberculosis, and they put me on the 2 years treatment regimen. So this 2 years treatment included 8 months painful injection I took daily, and there was 8 different antibiotics added in my treatment. So this treatment come with a severe side effect. During this treatment, I took almost 170 to 180 painful injections daily, and each TB patient who is, suffering with drug-resistant tuberculosis and undergoing this 2 years treatment has to take 14,000 pills uh, during the course of this complete treatment. So my treatment comes with lots of side effects. I was suffering with a severe nausea, vomiting. My skin tone changed completely. I would be happy if my presentation is visible because I have put some my photographs during my treatment time. But due to technical glitch, my skin tone changed completely, reddish brown color. I lost weight. I was just weighing 39 kg. Repeated hospitalization, depression, and daily painful injection which interfere your day-to-day life. So during this course, I got support from my family, friends, and I'm able to complete this treatment in 2 years' time. But stigma is also there in the society when you say you're suffering with TB. So then people, get conscious to talk with you, to socialize with you. Though I was not suffering with pulmonary tuberculosis, I was suffering with extra pulmonary tuberculosis. Still, I faced this stigma because of this disease. So post completing this treatment, I started once my injectable was stopped after 8 months. I enrolled for some educational course. So I completed post graduation diploma in clinical trials during my treatment, and after that I started advocating for the awareness against this AMR. So during this, my treatment was completely free, and I believe the things which work in my case was I got access to TB medications like bedaquiline and dilaminate. That was the most powerful medication at that time. So my treatment outcome was positive because of those treatments. Uh, I was fortunate enough to get the good doctors who asked me to undergo some advanced testing. Otherwise, misdiagnostic diagnosis I have to face. So I think in the AMR infection or drug resistant infection, diagnosis plays very important role. Then support from the family and friends is also play important role to complete this 2 years treatment. And my treatment was completely free because I got access to this novel medications through the organization and MSF. So I think that things work for me to complete this 2 years treatment. And after completing the treatment, I started advocating for the patients. I started, talking about my experience. I started sharing my stories to, through the YouTube short films, through the webinars and all. So, AMR is not a future pandemic. It's a current problem, and if this can happen to me, this can happen to anyone. And we currently WHO in 2023, WHO announced the task force of AMR survivors. So the major role of this task force is to give a human face to the this AMR problem. AMR problem is the current situation. It's not a future situation or a distant future. Patient suffering. So patient who are sufferer give a carer to any drug resistant patients. They share their stories, their real life experience of not getting access to the medications or not getting diagnosed timely. So I think this real stories will help policymakers and pharma industry or people who are working closely with AMR thing to know the ground level situations. So at the task force function, if we see, we as a survivor share our stories in a way that it's reached to the global audience. Engagement in the WHO events and discussions on AMR. We are also raising an awareness of AMR and advocating for relevant improvements across the clinical, research, development, and policy spheres. Advocacy for increased fund and donors' commitment towards the AMR, and also developing a framework for the patient advocacy and identifying the priorities area to guide other patient groups. So AMR is invisible, we survivors are not. Thank you.
Thank you, Bhakti. And I was just in time to also hear you speak. So I think slides or no slides, I think this is very, very good to hear your experience on how you were able to get treatment, how you were able to get a diagnosis. It really speaks on the importance of access, and we're happy to have you on the panel as well. Because I think it's a very powerful testimony in that sense on the role that also pharma companies can play. So thank you for sharing. Moving on to the other panelists, maybe to start with Ali from WHO. When we look at the political declaration on AMR, there are a lot of areas where pharma companies can play a role as well. So I was really curious to hear from you, like what are the gaps that you see that pharmaceutical companies could basically start working on today? Ali.
Thank you very much, Martin, and thanks for the opportunity to participate in this discussion. And thanks so much to Bhakti for sharing her story and reminding us why we're all doing the work that we do. So as you said, Martin, yes, there's a number of areas of the political declaration where pharmaceutical companies have a responsibility, working also in partnership with other key stakeholders that are needed to really achieve future progress. I think one of the ones that is quite obvious, I suppose, is around many of the statements in the declaration that speak to ensuring equitable access to new antibiotics, other antibiotics, existing ones as well, and also to other commodities that are needed, such as diagnostics and vaccines, and particularly in low and middle income countries. There's a huge multi-pronged effort that's needed to ensure access, looking at all the different reasons why we have poor access today across all of those commodities. But a few of the elements in the declaration that are specific, where there's a specific role for companies, I would say, is in reference to participating in technology transfer and encouraging research and innovation and committing to voluntary licensing where possible. I think we have a very good effort ongoing currently with cefiderocol, with Shionogi, working with GARD-P, and replicating that model. I think could be something that could be done as new products become available, and potentially with some existing products as well. I would also say that there's other references to strengthening and expanding on the pull incentives, such as revenue guarantees for new pharmaceuticals. And that really requires also pharmaceutical companies to come to the table to participate in those guarantee mechanisms and to enter into those arrangements that are becoming, more and more numerous, with Italy announcing the latest one at the G7 a couple of weeks ago. So I think that really requires also a commitment on the part of companies to participate in those opportunities as well. And then maybe the third one, because time is short, is around sustainable production and looking at manufacturing standards. Here, I think there's an opportunity for continuing the progressive implementation and improvement that we already see. There have been industry standards that have already been developed for waste and wastewater management from pharmaceutical manufacturing. And now in 2024, WHO has published its guidance. It's the first ever guidance on antibiotic pollution from manufacturing. So this guidance now exists, and I think there is opportunities to start taking that on in a progressive way that also mitigates any unintended consequences to access that may come from, too stringent an approach too quickly. Over.
Yes, thank you. And maybe as a follow-up question, you mentioned a few things already on what WHO is doing. But I was curious if you can elaborate a bit more on that, like how WHO is maybe supporting these pharma companies. You mentioned the guidance, but yeah, any more examples or in-depth explanation that you can provide on that?
Sure. Yes. I mean, WHO is doing a number of things. I think, we are aiming to direct the investments in AMR R&D to areas of greatest public health need. So here I would highlight the bacterial priority pathogens list, as well as the fungal priority pathogens lists. These are lists of drug-resistant bacteria that pose the greatest risk to human health and are intended to be used as a kind of a prioritization mechanism for R&D efforts and investments. The fungal list was published a couple of years ago, and the bacterial list, which was first published in 2017, was just updated and published in 2024. We also have a number of target product profiles that also aim to guide R&D efforts, and we'll be doing more of those in 2025. Another area that WHO is working on is on pediatric antibiotics. And in 2022, WHO, the AMR division, in cooperation with the science division of WHO and the GAP-F, undertook the first pediatric drug optimization, this POTO exercise for antibiotics. And this really aimed to identify a short list of antibiotics to be prioritized for pediatric formulations and R&D. And as of the part of the next steps from that, we are working now on trying to tackle some of the regulatory barriers to clinical trials and registration of pediatric products as well. Beyond that, I would say we're also doing quite a large number of efforts to track R&D pipelines and the investments and efforts that are happening in the pipelines. We have an annual antibacterial pipeline assessment for both preclinical and clinical stages of R&D. And we've expanded this year to do a similar exercise for antifungals that will be published soon. We also have two pipeline assessments that will be published soon as well in the area of diagnostics, both for fungal and bacterial infections. And in 2022, also did a review of vaccines as well for AMR. So we're aiming to really keep on track of all the different pipelines and the progress that's being made there. And then finally, I would mention also on access, we're working in partnership with GARD-P on the Secure Initiative, which is an initiative to improve access to both new and existing antibiotics. That has been under development now for the past 2 years, and we're really aiming to move next year into a proof of concept phase and test some of the interventions that have been designed with a few antibiotics and start to roll that out. And under the Secure Initiative, there are a number of other activities that are already underway, such as developing a forecasting tool, conducting cost of goods analyses, and at WHO, we're developing guidance for countries as well who are interested in introducing a new antibiotic to take them through the planning stages from A to Z as well. So there's a lot of activity going on under Secure, but really with culminating in this proof of concept that we aim to get up and running next year. And I'll stop there. Thanks.
Thanks. I think we almost need a report with all the WHO reports that are provided to not only companies, but governments, but also organizations like the Access to Medicine Foundation, who is using those a lot. So very excited to hear that those new reports also on diagnostics and antifungals are coming, because I think everyone is also kind of screaming for those. So thank you for that. Moving to Maria, I think a whole different stakeholder representation, representing an investor. And I think when we hear investor in the AMR space, we think investment in pipeline projects or something like that. But you are actually representing a very large asset manager who is investing in companies as a shareholder and using your influence a bit more to move companies in certain directions. So I think it's very interesting to hear what you are doing and how you, as an investor, can basically help mobilize pharmaceutical companies to act on AMR.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Martin and the Access to Medicine Foundation, to invite me. I just want to make sure that you can actually hear me fine. Hopefully you would have waved if you couldn't. So I think I would be quite keen to explain, follow up on what you said, Martin, on what is it that, who are we and what is it that we can actually do? What is the type of capital that we're looking at? And then I will also provide some examples of concrete examples of an engagement. And I'll link back actually to a couple of things that Ali has just mentioned and how we can take what the WHO does and actually use it in our engagement with the companies. Hopefully that gives a good idea. So basically, we are a large asset manager on a global level. We manage about $1.4 trillion US dollars. Now, that's actually not a lot of money if you look at the whole spectrum of players that we're looking at. So if you look at the majority of our clients, they are actually pension funds. And if you look at the largest pension fund markets or largest pension markets in the world, it's estimated that they manage assets equivalent to 60 trillion US dollars, almost 60 trillion US dollars. The largest markets are the US, followed by UK, Japan, Canada, Australia, etc. Now, these assets that we're talking about, they're basically more than 100% of these countries' GDP. So just to give you an idea of the size of the money we're talking about, if you to this capital would also add the capital of endowments, foundations, insurance funds, sovereign wealth funds, and mutual funds, the total asset value would be 170 trillion US dollars. So quite a lot of money. Bear with me because I'll get to what the AMR connection is. So having this type of capital or assets, that doesn't sit in a bank, it will be invested. And that asset will be invested in shares, so stocks and bonds. And which means that we become, as a manager, as one of many managers of this capital, we become owners on behalf of our clients of the companies in which we are invested. Legal in general is invested in about between 9,000 to 10,000 companies. So basically every publicly listed companies in the world. Now, what does that mean? That we can have with companies to challenge them and support them in their overall efforts. Obviously, the end of the whole conversation and for the company is to have a return on the investment. Now, this type of money, where is it invested? In companies, as I said. If you look at the world's 20 largest companies, 4 of those are pharma or healthcare companies. Now, why do we, as an institutional investor, look at health as an issue? Shouldn't we just be looking at we invest and what is the return on that money? Now, it's estimated that approximately 50% of global GDP is negatively impacted due to poor health. So as an investor, that's a very good reason to look at health issues in AMR. Now, how do we bring that down to AMR? We consider AMR a systemic risk. i.e. a risk that has severe negative consequences to financial markets. Think of something like climate change, the impact of COVID-19, or the financial crisis. Now, again, further down and coming into the AMR space, we look at AMR and consider our portfolio of companies in which we're invested. We look at pharma companies, both from a risk and opportunity perspective. And when we say pharma companies, we look both at animal pharma and human pharma. Then we also look at the food system, hence food and beverage companies, fast food companies, meat processor, and water utility companies. All of these companies we see as either having an impact on the increase of AMR or in a positive impact and decreasing the speed by which AMR is growing. Now, perhaps to give you some concrete examples is, so if we look at pharmaceutical companies, both, again, as I said, animal and pharma, we will ask for transparency when it comes to their activities in particular antibiotics, but also antimicrobials, to disclose also their product line, so the type of antibiotics and other antimicrobials that they are manufacturing or developing. How is their marketing connected with this? In addition, we would also ask them questions on, are they contributing to the AMR Action Fund? Are they considering, even if they have no antimicrobial pipeline or R&D division, how do they look at AMR when it comes to their oncology division, for example? If it's a medtech company, how are they looking at their knee implants and the risk of AMR connected with that? So as Ali mentioned, you highlighted the WHO guidance on wastewater and solid waste management for manufacture of antibiotics. To give the whole title of the guidance, we use that combined with the AMR Industry Alliance standards that were published, I think, about 3 years ago. So in speaking to those pharmaceutical companies that manufacture antibiotics and other antimicrobials, we ask them, so how are you applying these standards? What are your challenges? How is the process audited? And how are you seeing that you can include, or how are you looking at the compliance that you can have with the new WHO guidance? If you look at, when we look at fast food companies, I'm sure a couple of names springs to mind, so in conversations with these companies, we require them to apply the WHO guidelines on the use of medically important antimicrobials in food-producing animals. And we ask them and that they require that use of those guidelines in their entire supply chain. Now, how do we make, so this is one part in the conversations we have with these companies, is asking them, how are you employing these international guidelines and how are you making sure that they are applied in your entire supply chain? We also have a public health policy where we again list the guidance and standards that we expect the companies in which we are invested to apply. And there's a separate stream of work, and I'll finish in a second, is the work that we do together with other investors. And that we do via the Investor Action on AMR. The Investor Action on AMR is a group of investors, both what's known as asset managers like us and asset owners, that is pension funds, that have come together and try to see how we can collaboratively work either with policymakers or companies on AMR. And a concrete example of our efforts is a political statement that we launched prior to the high-level meeting on AMR in New York, with very specific asks that we had for policymakers to consider. So, for example, the independent panel for evidence was something that we called out and wanted to see. And so we were delighted both to see in the JEDA commitments of that being more concrete and given a push forward. And then also, just as on a side note, this week, the initiative actually won a prize for New Industry Association and the efforts we've taken. So on that note, I will end. And happy to take questions on that later. Back
Thank
to
you,
Martin.
Maria, and very, very clear also to bring a bit more awareness on the role and the influence investors can have. So thank you for elaborating that and putting a bit of a magnitude to all the trillions of dollars that you were talking about to put that in perspective. So thank you. Moving to Bo from Sandoz. We're talking about pharma companies, and it's maybe very easy to say, oh, pharma companies must do this, they must do that. So I'm very happy to have you on the panel as well to share some perspectives from a company who is actually one of the largest generic companies active in antimicrobials, but also present in low middle income countries. So maybe to start off with, what do you think that companies can do to make this political declaration a success? And maybe more specifically, what action is Sandoz taking at the moment?
Absolutely. So firstly, can you hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. So let me start off also by saying thanks to you, the organizers, and also all the participants. It's an incredible opportunity to be able to talk about what is, and as we heard, an already very serious pandemic. Let me just start off by saying when it comes to partnerships, I agree 100%. Look, without partnerships, we're not going to get progress. And I think we all need to remember, when we were dealing with COVID, as was already mentioned, when we collaborated together, we developed a vaccine in record time. And I think this serves as an excellent example to all of us about what success looks like, right? And how we can apply this to AMR. So I think to your question, Martin, when it comes to, what do we need from companies? I think it stems down to two things. It's commitment and it's balance. So on the commitment side, with everyone concerned, we need to treat this global health threat with the urgency that it needs, right? Which is also very nicely reflected in the UN Declaration. And we need a balance. And a good way to measure balance, I think, is across, the 4 pillars established by the AMR Global Response Strategy. And I think it's an excellent framework for companies to follow, right? So that's the responsible manufacturing, responsible use, responsible access, plus innovation. Now, when we talk about companies generally, right, that means, balancing the focus on innovation. We see this being led by the branded sector. And there we need to just assure that we have substantial resources in place to A, keep developing the pipeline, and B, make sure that once they get on the market, they stay there and they get to the patients, where they need it. Now, Sandoz is a generics company, right? And so for the generics companies, generally, what balance means across the pillars would be responsible manufacturing, as we already heard from Alexandra Maria, making sure that the production is environmentally friendly. The responsible access, so making sure that not only that the patients have access to antibiotics, but they have access to the right ones, regardless of where they are. So we've heard the expression right patient, right time, and right place, as well as stewardship and education, which is in the responsible use pillar that the industry guidance follows. And I would add what we heard from Bhakti, what's also equally important is to make sure that we have rapid diagnostics as well, to ensure that the right medication is given on time and to them in the right way. Now, many of you have probably heard me before speaking at different events that I really need to emphasize this concept of balance. We know the importance of developing new modalities to address the future emerging threats of AMR. We know that, but we can't forget that most antibiotics used today are generic, right? And we need an equal focus to make sure that we make the most of what we have, that we have access to what we have now, that we use what we have now in the best way, because ultimately it's the balance between underuse and overuse, right? And what it also does is it buys time for the innovator sector to really do their tough job to bring a product successfully to market there. So using the simple expression that I always say, what we have is what we've got. So let's use what we have in the best way possible. Now, coming to your question, Martin, about what Sandoz is doing. So you mentioned it's the global leader in generics. So it's a generics company, right? Focusing on anti-infectives, a lot of small molecules and biosimilars. When it comes to antibiotics, Sandoz has 80 years of experience, so a long legacy, as well as a unique European-based antibiotics network. There are a total of 58 antibiotics that are provided worldwide, right? Many of those are on the WHO's essential medicines list. And also that's complementary. Let's remember, AMR is not just from bacteria. So there is a complementary portfolio of the antifungal and antiviral treatments as well. So coming back to my point around, let's use this framework, around the 4 pillars. When it comes to responsible access, I mean, in general, we have a unique and balanced approach across all the 4 pillars. Responsible access, I think, is one key area where Sandoz has a very significant impact to patients. We reach several hundred patients every year, and it's the combination of the scale as well as the broad portfolio that makes sure we can drive this responsible access to the appropriate medicines. And Sandoz actually, in light of the UN Declaration, as well as before, we continue to invest heavily in our manufacturing capabilities, both on API and FDF side of things, to make sure that we increase our volumes of the right products to meet the growing demand, right? And that will drive the responsible access goals that we all have. Now, the last thing I'll mention on the responsible access piece is that it's been mentioned before, and we've seen it in the UN Declaration over and over again. Partnerships are the key. No one company or no one organization can do this alone. So we partner with many different bodies from multiple sectors to make sure that we're providing access and that the policies are in place to make sure that it's sustainable as well. And we are also part of the Industry Alliance, where we are one of the members representing the Alliance in the generics industry on the board. Now, switching gears, we've heard this already, and it's a very important point to responsible manufacturing. I mean, clearly, we need to make sure also from a One Health approach that the manufacturing we do does not negatively impact the environment in any way. And so, Maria, you mentioned the BSI certification standard. Sandoz was amongst the first companies to certify their products in Kundl, Austria. So that's the major site in Europe, to make sure that we minimize the risk of any sort of aquatic toxicity and the spread of AMR. And we continue to do so, and there's commitments on that front. And the last thing I will say on this, let's not forget about responsible use, right? We heard from Bhakti in the importance of understanding what medications we need and be able to diagnose very quickly. And Sandoz also has a lot of activities here. So, we have multiple programs where we have medical education activities worldwide, and also partnerships that help physicians select the most appropriate therapy. Through 2024, there have been 50,000 HCPs that have gone through Sandoz medical educational activities, really focused on the responsible use of anti-infectives. And the last thing I'll say on this is that, we have multiple campaigns at country level across the globe that not only focus on specific stewardship and education to HCPs, but equally important also to patients, because knowledge is power, right? And power will make sure that the right questions are asked. And everyone, whether it's an HCP or a patient or otherwise, we need to all understand what is the threat, learn so that we can ask the right questions as well as teach others. So I will pause there, Martin.
Yes, thank you. I also wanted to quickly touch base on the balance you mentioned, but also the balance that there is of what pharma companies can do and what maybe governments can do to also stimulate pharma companies, because the political declaration does mention a few points of action to stimulate the market for antimicrobials. So we are a bit short on time, but if you can quickly touch base on how the declaration also can support companies in that way.
Sure. Thanks, Mark. So look, very, very simply, I mean, I think what the declaration did very, very well is it showed exactly what needs to be done. What are the priorities? What has to be done first? What's critical, and where it needs to be done? Now, and I think that it mentions access several times. It mentions surveillance and diagnostics. It's well equipped to basically give us the tools to say, okay, who do we need to work with to make it happen? I think in terms of what's still missing and where we can really do a lot more is we need this equal focus, on ensuring the sustainability of the industry. We need to make sure that we work together with policymakers to make sure we have this responsible access I've been talking about over time, right? So that we don't lose our ability to fight these infections. Now, when we're talking specifically about those that exist, and particularly the generics molecules, we know that when we look at penicillins, for example, and the Axis group on the AML, they're the backbone of modern medicine. They're the majority of what's used today. So when we think about, okay, will we always have sustainable access? And that also includes to LMIC, so really globally. AMR is one of the threats when it comes to sustainable access and use of these medications. The other one is the dysfunctional market that we see, the market framework, that's really applied. I'm talking really about the generics antibiotics. So why? Because unfortunately, regardless of the market archetypes, these are treated largely as commodities and not as the essential medicines that they are, where it's all about price, you know, and the race to the bottom, where producers basically have to supply at fixed price levels, regardless of changes in the market, with very little focus on other things like environmental factors that we've heard, and this is not sustainable. And this is really the worst of both worlds. So we need to work together with the different sectors and also policymakers to make sure that we have the right framework in place that's fit for the future purpose, that we can use these medications as long as possible and as effectively as possible. And also, as was mentioned, let's look at what the innovators are doing in terms of incentives and support, which can, in a lot of sense, also be applied not only to the existing manufacturers to make sure that they sustain themselves on the market, but also to LMICs, you know, new ways. Look at the guaranteed revenue model that was mentioned. I mean, we could take that approach and we could say, okay, can governments come together, neighboring countries and LMICs, identify common burdens, whether those are recurring shortages, for example, or whether those are new medications that we have resistance data that's saying this would be the most efficacious to address the issue, pool those burdens together, and then work with companies to essentially create models that are sustainable. And let's not forget, right? We know the burden that LMICs have, right? Especially when it comes to access, which is largely a big driver of the AMR associated mortalities. But this is a global issue. Let's not forget the shortages we've seen in Europe and North America as well, which is largely driven by the same fundamental issues in the market framework. So I'll pause there because I know we're short on time, but happy to also take questions on this more. Thank you.
Thanks, Bo. And thanks for providing a bit of perspective from a company on what companies can do, but also how the political declaration or governments can kind of support that that market as well. Moving to Daniel, working at mPharma, a company who provides solutions for access for supply chains in African countries. Basically working with pharmacies, governments, but also pharma companies. I'm very happy to hear a bit more on the work that you do and how you work with these pharma companies to basically increase access, but also affordability. So handing over to you, Daniel.
Thanks, Martin. And thanks to all the speakers. It's been incredible hearing about this from so many different perspectives. So I think probably we're the lesser known of the organizations on this panel. So I guess it will be useful to give a little bit of context about how mPharma works. Basically, we've spent the last decade building a Pan-African supply chain focusing on last mile delivery. We partner with pharmaceutical companies and generic manufacturing across the continent, work with local community pharmacies in 10 different markets, tap them into the supply chain through a partnership program called Quality RX. And we use these pharmacies as a way to increase access and affordability through economies of scale by building like a patient network that we call MUTI and drive traffic to these pharmacies. Once we establish these community pharmacies, we use them as a launching point for additional clinical services, including rapid diagnostics in the pharmacy space, telemedicine, and the ability to follow up with patients with nurses, and of course, PSPs or patient support programs that we build with pharmaceutical companies. So a bit more about PSPs in general, because I think it's probably the most interesting for this call. We have about 18 programs across 14 different disease areas. Each one of them is bespoke, that we do workshops with pharma partners where we decide on an approach, whether it be market access programs that focus more on price reduction versus disease management that include price reduction, but also focus more on holistic value add for the patient. And during these workshops, we draw on a menu of solutions and infrastructure that we've built over the last decade. So I mentioned this patient pool of patients. We have good demographic data and location data, as well as disease burden data on these patients by interacting with them at the point of sale. We've built an end-to-end supply chain across 10 different markets that meet regulatory requirements to deal directly with pharmaceutical companies. This retail network, we have about 600 outlets across those 10 countries as well. We've built call center infrastructure in each one of our markets, staffed by healthcare professionals that patients can dial into to get advice or coaching. We do ADR and pharmacovigilance reporting, surveillance, physician engagement inside of hospitals to drive traffic to these programs and build awareness. We have market intelligence that we gather from Bloom about dispensations, either to members or non-members, and what kind of products people are using for what treatments, as well as building financial products for those MUTI members that enable them to better afford or spread out payments over time. We call it heal now, pay later. We work with pharma partners also to do price guarantees to try and stabilize pricing for essential products. This is especially important nowadays with rising inflation in our markets. The situation has been quite dire for the last year, and making sure that there's price stability for products that are needed is of critical importance. And of course, training and coaching and building a team of nurses and healthcare professionals that can really play a role in supporting patients as they go through whatever treatment it is that they need. So I'll try and highlight a specific example. Our most successful example is for an oncology treatment in Nigeria. So prior to mPharma's engagement with a pharmaceutical company around this product, we're talking about one specific, quite expensive oncology treatment. It required about a year of treatment spread over 3-week cycles, about 18 cycles in total. Already quite expensive. But add on top of that the cost of admission for a day's worth of IV treatment, additional radiotherapy that was required, transportation to and from the hospital, often required maybe missing work. And all of these things together meant that no patient in any of the hospitals we were working with achieved more than 5 of the necessary 18 cycles of their treatment. So we worked with a pharma partner to sort of bundle some of these costs together, subsidize reduce the cost of the medication, subsidize the cost of radiotherapy, subsidize the cost of transportation. And we brought this number from no more than 5 patients to an average of 16 cycles out of 18, which is pretty exciting progress. We know that with regards to AMR, right, improving adherence and improving appropriate use is really critical to success. And so building programs around patients that truly understands holistically what the needs are and what the barriers are preventing them from getting proper treatment is really critical to success.
Thank you. Looking at the time, I think we maybe want to have a quick question for all the panelists, but I really ask you to keep it short, because I do think we have a question from the audience or something that we want to answer as well. So, but I do want to ask you this, because in the political declaration, we talk a lot about targets, and we're very happy that targets are included. Taking this mindset, and let's play around with this a little bit. Let's say if we would set targets for pharmaceutical companies, then what is it that you would like to see? What topics are priority? Maybe you have a bold target, a bold statement that you want to bring in. I just want to open the floor, maybe give a very short, maybe 30 seconds, 1 minute each to touch upon this. Maybe starting with Ali. Go ahead.
Great, thanks. Yeah, I think we could think about a number of targets, but probably in 30 seconds, what I would want to highlight is I really think, and I believe there's quite a good consensus among the stakeholders in the R&D community that we need R&D targets. Right now, for example, WHO is monitoring the pipeline, but we don't actually have a metric to say, what does good look like? What are we actually trying to achieve? How close are we? How far are we from that goal? So I think that that's really the critical need right now. And are looking at opportunities to do that work in partnership with other stakeholders now that the political declaration has been adopted. I think that there are other access metrics that we can look at as well. For new products, you can look at things around, number of registrations in a number of countries, price levels, and so on. For the existing antibiotics, and I really want to highlight what Bo said, it's so critically important to also work on the access challenges for those products as well. That type of target would be a little bit more complicated because the access challenges are multiple, and they depend on the country, they depend on the individual product. So we would need to look at that more carefully, I think. But just measuring access in the first place and understanding what is good access and how far away are we from that in countries, and what are the root causes of the access barriers. Is it a shortage problem? Is it a problem of low demand? Is it a pricing problem? Just getting a better understanding of that before we even set a target around how we want to improve that, I think would be critically important also. Thanks.
Yes, Bhakti, anything to add?
Yes, access is the most important thing, and I think responsible use of those antibiotics is also very critical at this stage. We have very few options left because most of the patients are, resistant to most powerful antibiotics nowadays. So I think restricted use of those antibiotics, a responsible use, I would say, and this is it's very important at this moment. And also we should think about the alternative therapies along with this small molecules or this biological therapies are there. Alternative therapies we need to think about when we say we need the access to their medications.
Thank you. Bo?
Thanks, Martin. I've set a timer of 30 seconds to make sure we stay on track. So look, I agree with all the panelists so far and what they said, so I won't repeat it. What I would add, number one, I would love to see all companies that are producing anti-infective molecules to be certified under a standard. I think we should not underestimate the impact on the environment. So having a target that really checks, not only the quality of the products, but the environmental friendliness of the products would be one. I think also in light of the UN Declaration, the UN Declaration states that, countries should be really striving to have 70% of the antibiotics in the access group of the essential medicines list used. So I think another good metric could be, number one, the coverage of the essential medicines group per country. So really, I would say, especially on the access group, and then percentage of what's really used there. It would also, we've heard from Bhakti on the stewardship, so I fully agree on that. Maybe the last one I would quickly add is, let's not forget, when we look at burdens of AMR, the pediatric populations are very underrepresented. And I would love to see metrics, both in LMICs and HICs alike, right, that are, number one, measuring, what everyone is doing in terms of having access to products that address pediatric populations, as well as developing new anti-infective products as well to address emerging problems in the pediatric population. So we need to also make sure AMR is a big problem, but we have to look at also the underrepresented and the burden of the individual populations. So I'll pause there, Martin.
Yes, thank you. Maria, any final thoughts?
No, I would. I'll put on the timer as well. I agree with the previous panelist. I would probably re-highlight access, meaning appropriate access and diagnostics. The certification part, I think, is extremely important. What Bo was mentioning. What I would add is the surveillance and monitoring. Which I think is connected with the certification, and I would not want agriculture and animal health to take a sort of a second step. That is as important in the view of One Health. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you. Final words for Daniel to close off the webinar.
Totally agree with all the other panelists. I would say access for us is the most important question in this equation. Working with suppliers in country, there's generally pretty restrictive exit clauses or exclusivity clauses with pharma suppliers, especially around innovation products. And if the suppliers aren't stocking access versions of those products at the time, it's virtually impossible to get those products. So diversifying the possible menu of suppliers within any given country, making sure that access products are in market, tracking expiries around those products is really important. And again, also at the from a clinical perspective, making sure that you're actually investing as a pharmaceutical company or an institutional investor in companies or institutions that are providing diagnostic services at the point of care, especially within pharmacies where we know most people in low and middle income countries are actually receiving their first point of contact with a care provider, right? Access to primary medicine in our markets is very low. So building up infrastructure within the pharmacy, a space that people really trust already, is a good technique to achieve that goal, and investing in that infrastructure is really important.
Yes, thank you. A lot of great ideas. We're already a bit over time, so unfortunately we are skipping on the Q&A session. But I really want to thank the participants, the speakers, but also the audience for tuning in. I do think it really shows how important collaboration is. I think showcasing a bit more awareness to, for example, the investor. The investor space has been really helpful, and of course Bhakti as well with sharing that journey and that roller coaster of what it means to get access to antibiotics. So on that note, there will be a recording available, so feel free to check that out later on. But for now, I want to thank you and enjoy the rest of your day. Thanks all.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Have a good day.
Have a good day, everyone.